He was Turkey's top diplomat and prime minister during one of the country's most testing periods in recent history. As war in Syria rages and Turkey continues to press on with Operation Olive Branch to protect its borders and eliminate the terrorist threat, we ask former Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoglu about Turkey's policies in Syria, past and present, and whether the country is taking a new direction away from its traditional allies, or if it's trying to balance its role in the region between East and West. I'm Imran Garda. This is One on One. And Ahmet Davutoglu joins me now, former Prime Minister of Turkey. Great to have you here on TRT World. Thank you for joining us on One on One. Let's talk Operation Olive Branch. At the 3-week stage, for those watching from the outside, they see Turkey conducting an incursion into northern Syria. They're asking, is it worth it? Is it necessary?
Yes, it is necessary. In fact, it is important to understand general geopolitical situation in Syria at this moment. It is not only necessary for Turkish security needs, but also it is necessary for the future of Syria. For the last 7 years, Turkey had to face many challenges because of the civil war and tensions in Syria. And Turkey was very reluctant not to make any intervention to any neighboring country. That has been our policy for decades. And that has been our policy during our government's time from 2002 until now. But the crisis in Syria reached to such a level which starts to threaten Turkish security and border security, as well as domestic situation close to the border. Several rockets were fired from this part of Syria, Afrin, to Kilis. No country can tolerate such a situation. So it was necessary for Turkish security needs, but also it is necessary for the future of Syria, because if we accept certain de facto zones inside Syria, dividing Syrian people as Kurdish region, Arab region, Turkoman region, it will be very difficult to keep Syria as united. And in this part of Syria, not only it is not a Kurdish territory, it is a territory which is controlled by PKK. So Kurdish people should not be identified with PKK. Kurds in Syria are our brothers and sisters, like Arabs or Turkoman or Christians or Muslims. But this particularly PKK wants to hijack this cause and make this base, this region, Afrin, as a base for terrorist activities.
Why do you think it's been so difficult to convince your allies that these guys are not worth supporting? And I talk about the United States. They say, well, listen, the YPG fights Daesh, and that's why we need to support them in this moment in time. Enemy of my enemy is my friend. Are they genuinely that naive about it, or is it just cold, cynical politics? You arm a bad guy to fight a worse guy?
Unfortunately, the basic problem now on the ground, not only in Syria, in Iraq or in all region, is the problem of integrity. Principle-wise, we have to act together against all terrorist groups, and we should not be making terrorist groups in different categories based on their ethnicity or religion or ideological ground. Unfortunately, the United States in Syria asked everybody, and also Turkey, to work together against Daesh, which was a valid and legitimate request, and Turkey has been in the coalition. So these coalition forces, Turkey is inside. But once Turkey is inside, then US had to listen to Turkish concerns, not only Turkish concerns. In fact, it is a matter of principle. According to US current legislation or rules, principles, PKK is a terrorist organization.
Right.
And PKK is a terrorist organization in general accepted by US government, by US legal definition. But on the ground, they are helping a wing of PKK.
But that's why they don't say that the YPG is PKK, because they would be contravening their own laws, right?
This is not only naive, this is diluting the reality.
Right.
We know all the names, everybody, all intelligence I mean, organizations or intelligence circles of different countries know very well the leaders of PKK and the leaders of YPG. And we know Americans even know better than any other, because they know all this link from Kandil to Sinjar, from Sinjar to Haseke and up to Afrin. And the names are there.
Yeah, but for
the
the
organization
moment,
structure is there.
But that's what they're
Then
saying.
they cannot, if they continue to follow this policy, they cannot ask anybody to fight against Al-Qaeda if a wing of Al-Qaeda is different than the other. This is totally inconsistent and unacceptable.
They use Daesh as the example. They say, okay, fine, yes, they might be connected to the PKK. But Turkey, you didn't do anything in Kobani. These guys had to fight Daesh. And that's why we need to support them, because Daesh is a worse threat for now.
It is also not true. I have been in this process as chief advisor, as Minister of Foreign Affairs, and as Prime Minister. In Kobani, when Daesh attacked Kobani, we received all the refugees, not US or not EU. In one night, hundreds of thousands of people came to Turkey. We paid the bill of these attacks. Turkey is the first country which made operations against Daesh. I was Prime Minister in July 2015, and when these terrorist attacks spread, I mean, by PKK and by Daesh, same night we made offensive against Daesh in Syria and against PKK in Iraq. So the first operations, military operations against Daesh was conducted by Turkey. Nobody can deny this reality. And all the refugees escaping from Syria came to Turkey. So it is not a correct justification. Nobody can justify to work with a terrorist organization, not only according to our principles, our rules, but according to American definition. PKK is a terrorist organization, and according to American intelligence, they cannot deny this. PKK is a wing of PYD is a wing of PKK.
Right. The Pentagon just organized a press tour to Manbij with two senior generals, General Gerard Paul Funk, General Gerard and Lieutenant General Paul Funk. They were quoted in the media. You hit us, we will respond aggressively. We will defend ourselves. So they're standing there with the Manbij Military Council. Now, Turkey says they're YPG. These guys say, no, they're the Manbij Military Council. They're not YPG. They're standing there. They're squaring off. They're looking at Turkey in the face and saying, you want to fight with us? Come fight with us. What is going on? These are NATO allies. As a former foreign minister, as a former prime minister, should we expect the worst here?
It is really terrible and unacceptable. Turkey and US are two allies. If they have to make an empathy, if assume that, God forsake, in Mexico there is a civil war, and some people are coming to American-Mexican border, Al-Qaeda forces, and attacking US. If any other country supported such a group, what would they feel? How would they feel? So Turkey, for Americans, PYG may not be seen as a threat, but Turks, for Turkey, it's a threat. And they have to respect Turkish security concerns. And if, of course, we never want, if there is any confrontation between Turkish and American forces on the ground, that will be a terrible situation and terrible consequences. No, I am sure nobody will want to see such a picture, and I am sure the rationality of Turkish-American relations, which goes back to decades, will be there, and nobody should challenge against Turkey.
I wonder what you think about an answer I got from Peter Galbraith, a very famous US diplomat, former ambassador to multiple countries, when I spoke to him about the YPG and the fact that they use, for example, suicide bombings and terror tactics all over as a terror group. And he said, you know, they empower women, and these guys are not Islamists. That was one of his arguments. Tell me how you feel when you hear that from a US diplomat.
The only criteria, being not Islamist, is it the only criteria not to be a terrorist? And terrorist groups in the previous decades and even now, there are Muslim or Christian So being an anti-Islamist, if this is the only criteria, then we will be facing many problems on the ground, because you are fighting in a Muslim populated area, and nobody should use Islam within that context. I think it is it shows the mindset, a wrong mindset behind all these pictures. That is the reason, in fact, many of the tensions between Muslim or non-Muslim groups or in global scale. We should avoid this type of terminology. Terrorism is a threat to all humanity, regardless of ethnic or religious background.
I want to circle back to the American relationship towards the end, but I want to move on a little bit and talk more specifically about Syria. You, for a period of time, were at the heart of all of this, the decision making. Looking at where Syria is now, 7 years on, do you have any personal regrets about your role as Prime Minister and Turkish policy during the time that you were in office with regards to Syria?
No, nothing. What Turkey did in last 7 years, even before that, our policy vis-à-vis Syria has been always honest, principled, and strategic. It was honest because we never had any hidden agenda regarding Syria. When we came to power in 2002, Turkish-Syrian relation was not in good mood. In a few period of time, in a few years, Turkish-Syrian relation became an exemplary relation. As chief advisor, I visited Syria 62 times to organize Syrian-Israeli indirect talks, to work together in Lebanon, to work together for regional stability. We never had any ethnic or sectarian agenda in Syria. And when Arab Spring started, from that time until now, we also had a principal orientation. First, we tried to engage Syrian government, Bashar Assad as well, for 6 months, 7 months. We tried to convince him not to use army against people. We tried to convince him to not to have a confrontational policy vis-à-vis in Syria. But unfortunately, he didn't listen to us. He didn't accept any diplomatic engagement on this issue. Later, we tried to defend our border as well as we tried to help Syrian people. Here we had basically 4 main targets or principle. One is humanitarian principle. We received refugees from the first day. I am sure nobody would criticize Turkey because of accepting refugees. Secondly, political dimension. We accepted Syrian National Council to have to work in Turkey, because at the end of the day, we always hoped that there will be a civil solution, diplomatic solution, political solution in Syria, and we tried to help peaceful opposition in Turkey. And today, both in Geneva or Astana or Sochi, Syrian opposition going there is for a solution is basically from the groups Turkey supported. So it was right. Third, when we realized that it is impossible to find becoming very difficult to find a political situation, and when Daesh came to the picture and all others, we supported Free Syrian Army in order purely Syrian, not foreign fighters, in order to work with them for our border security as well as to help Syrian refugees to stay in stabilized part of Syria. And fourth, Turkish security concerns. And we have all the right to defend our border, and all of our operations until now was only for the defense of our territory.
And for those who believe that Turkey has designs beyond smashing the YPG and securing the border, and that even if Turkey leaves, they want to install some sort of client state in the north of Syria, is there any credibility to that?
We all have a memory of history. We don't want to see The same thing what happened in northern Iraq. In Iraq, after American intervention in first Gulf War, because of the vacuum created by all these Iran-Iraqi war and also American intervention, PKK had a ground and base in northern Iraq, basically in Kandil. Turkey will never allow such a base in Syria anymore. And therefore, nobody should think that after this operation, still Turkey, there will be some de facto regions, some bases, some places where PKK activities will continue. Whenever there is such an activity against Turkey, Turkey will, I am sure Turkey will use the right of self-defense against this type of terrorist groups.
But again, for those of us who have seen this evolve, right, we saw Turkish-Russian tensions after the jet was downed. We've heard you at the end of 2015 accusing the Russians of ethnic cleansing in northern Latakia. And we know that you say that the regime was given a blank check. The Russians empower the regime, the Iranians empower the regime and its militias and its allies. And so we have this going on where Assad's main backers are the Iranians and the Russians, yes. Right?
Therefore, I said after 2015, the situation on the ground changed because of Russian and Iranian intervention.
Go to their state media, whether it's RT or Press TV. On a daily basis, they'll say Turkey supports jihadis in Syria, right? And that they're all Daesh or they're all Al-Qaeda and so on. So their narrative is that the regime didn't use chemical weapons on their own people. Are they natural allies for Turkey when it comes to the Middle East, or maybe is the West a better ally still?
Basically, in principle, I always supported the idea of regional engagement, for not only on Syria, but on nuclear issue of Iran and many other issues. Turkey was in favor of regional engagement and trying to solve our problems within the region. In that sense, Turkish, Iranian, Russian consultations and, if necessary, cooperation in West Asia in general is something positive. It doesn't mean that they have same or similar positions on all issues. But at least on certain issues, we should work together. My real disappointment in last 7-8 years was regarding Syria was, and I told this to my Russian, Iranian, or American colleagues when I was in the office. I was telling, okay, we disagree on the future of Syria or on the existing situation on the ground, but at least on two issues, we can agree, because these are the basic norms of international law. One is humanitarian situation, humanitarian access on the ground. We can work together to reach to East Ghouta or to Hama, Homs, Halep, at that time Aleppo, for humanitarian access. We can work together. We can work on Syrian opposition, you can work on Syrian regime, so that civilians will not be affected. One. Second, we can agree, and we should agree, on war crimes. Whoever use chemical weapons, Syrian regime or opposition or any other power, we have to act together. If we do not respect these two principles, there will be a hell on the ground and also very bad example for the future. Based on this, Turkish-Iranian, even when I was Minister of Foreign Affairs and later Prime Minister, Turkey and Iran agreed ceasefires on the ground several times. And a few days it has been implemented. And also we work with Russians on different ground. Today, whatever could be done for the future of Syrian civilians should be done.
But is it a case of either or? So in order to cooperate, as you say, with the Russians, for example, you have to turn your back on the West and fight with the West. Or in order to be with the West, you have to isolate the Russians.
No, this is not the case. Unfortunately, today, in fact, this is what is the problem, not only in Syria, but in international affairs. There are not common norms, we all agree. And there are tactical fronts. There should be a strategic front for all of us. What will be the future of Middle East? what will be the future of Syria. And there, if we agree on principles, we can make some progress together. But unfortunately today, there are tactical fronts emerging, and these fronts on the ground makes the situation even worse. There is a need of a real and sincere dialogue to establish an order in Syria and in the region, and also in global affairs.
Testing times in Turkey over a period of years. We saw things happening on the outside affecting citizens within the country as well, in the towns and cities, innocent civilians blown up by Daesh bombs or PKK bombs, for example. And then on top of all of that, when nobody expected it, there was a failed coup attempt from an enemy within the system. Tell me how much July 15th, 2016 affected modern Turkey and how it deals with itself internally and its neighbors as well.
It was a big crime against our nation. 15th of July will not be forgotten for not only for decades, for centuries. What was it? Of course, it was a shock because it was a trauma from within state. A group of soldiers whose main responsibility is to protect nation attacked our nation by using our own weapons. This is a big traumatic event.
And I told you we're going to sort of circle back to the tensions with the United States. This is one of the elements.
Yes.
They do not want to extradite Fethullah Gulen. A lot of American officials say, well, the request doesn't meet legal standards. There's not enough evidence to extradite him. And of course, there's the Zarab case, so courtrooms of New York, something else going on as well, also connected to this. It all builds up. The tension builds up. The strain between the nations seems to be telling. Is that going to be the magic ticket to restoring relations, where the day that Gulen is put on a plane and sent to Turkey, things will be fine?
Today, we have to be realistic. There is a gap of trust between Turkey and United States. Americans should understand the psychology in Turkey. Not only, I don't mean only government, president, or our party or political circles. They should understand the situation and the psychology of ordinary Turkish citizen if they want to continue a good relation with us. Today, if anybody goes to the street and asks to any ordinary Turkish citizen, which are the biggest enemies or threats against Turkey, they will say FETÖ, they will say PKK, they will say the HKPG, another terrorist organization, but basically FETÖ and PKK. Whoever defends FETÖ cannot have good relation with Turkey. Not only Turkey as government, but Turkish nation cannot gain the heart of Turkish nation. Turkish nation will not forget that nightmare of 15th of July. And whoever has direct or indirect relation with PKK in Syria or in Iraq, in Europe or in any other place, they cannot gain the heart of Turkish people. Without understanding this psychology, it is difficult to close this gap. Assume that if somebody goes to America and wants to have good relation with the United States, they ask which is the basic threat to Americans. They will say Al-Qaeda, for example. Then for us, main duty is to respect this psychology, this feeling. And Americans first should respect Turkish psychology and Turkish feeling, which is a collective psychology. It is not individual choice of our president or our government or our political circle. No, this is a collective psychology. Everybody, Kurds of Turkey, they are against PKK, and any people on the in the street, everybody is against FETÖ. They cannot be having good relation with even a small segment of society if they try to legitimize FETÖ based on certain legal procedural explanations, or they cannot convince Turkish people saying that they need YPG against Daesh. This is not an argument. Yes, there is a gap of trust, but two things should be done by American side to close this gap. One is immediately acting against FETÖ in US or outside, and do not make any direct or indirect cooperation, coordination with PKK. That is the basic preconditions, let me say. Not preconditioned by our government, but that is the basic things to be done to close this gap.
Yeah, thank you very much
Thank
for joining
you.
us, sir.
Thank you.
All the best.